Hello and welcome to the Moonshots podcast. There's lots of fun, cool-looking hipster New York. Yeah, you said New York people, right? These Yankees. They got hustle, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's Brooklynites here. There's Manhattanites. There's some Jersey in here.
We got a Jersey crew. Connecticut. Oh my gosh, this is all four corners of New York State. Welcome everybody. It's so good to have everybody here together for the Moonshots podcast. What a special moment for us, because we have traveled the world. We've done Amsterdam, Bucharest,
and now New York.
And now New York. And guys, I want you to give it up for our original New York boy, Mr. Chad Owen. Come on, give it up.
I'm just glad the Brooklynites here in the house, so.
What do you say? Peace to Brooklyn? I mean, do you have special call signs? I mean, I don't know how it works in New York, you know? You just roll with it. You got to be hipster cool. Just kick back.
Yeah, that's what I got the monochromatic Brooklyn look going on over here.
So here we are. We got the Brooklyn look happening, and we have got some fabulous guests. And with each of these people, we're on a mission to find out not only what they've done, because they've got some amazing achievements. They've traveled afar. They've done some crazy things. Some of them are madmen, but we'll get into that in a second. But this is our chance also to discover how they did it, to kind of try and learn if there were habits, if there are ways of doing things that we can all adopt for ourselves. So the mission that Chad and I are on is really to find out how people have achieved the things that they've done in their life, to see if we can adopt some of their thoughts, some of their mental models is a common one. And we really love to try and transfer all of that into actions that we can take, things that we can do in order to be more successful, to follow our dreams, to follow our passions. Now, Chad, we do have a little bit of your famous crowd surfing to do because this is a live event. You better brief our live studio audience here. What's going to be expected of them?
So after we talk to each guest, we would like for you to kind of give us your biggest insight and thing that you're taking away. And if you have a question, you can also ask that as well. In all of Mike's and my podcasting, themes begin to emerge from what we are hearing from our guests and the people that we're learning from and talking about. So I already have a prediction. I made a prediction with Mike earlier what tonight's theme might be, but we'll have to see if that comes to pass.
Right. So I think it's time to welcome our first guest. And for all of the online viewers, don't forget to check out moonshots.io. There you're going to find all of the archives of all of our show. We will have show notes. We'll have an archive of this show. Lots of information there, so you can pick that up at moonshots.io. And for our studio audience, you might be thinking, what is this strange looking device? This is actually a camera, and our massive Hollywood production crew is encapsulated here on this device. So we've got all the modern gadgets. I think we're ready to jump in and meet our first guest.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now what I want to tell everybody is that our first guest, he's a little bit shy. So you have to give him a rousing welcome when I tell you about this person, okay? So, Mitch Caplan. Mitch is the MD at Flock Associates, and this man has done some amazing things. He has worked in some great agencies. He's worked with a couple of good guys in the ad industry too, and we've got a lot to learn from Mitch. So would you all please show a very warm New York.
The room setup makes it sound like there's a lot more people here. That's great.
That's good. See, the audience at home, they can't actually see behind us. It's just three people sitting here. Hey, Mitch.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
I wanted to start our questions on an interesting note. You actually studied journalism, but quickly found your way to Madison Avenue. And I really want to understand, it's almost like out of the gates, there was a big jump that you made, and I would love to know, like, how did that happen?
Well, originally I wanted to be the drummer in Kiss. But that sort of fell to the wayside.
There's still time.
I do have a journalism degree from the University of Maryland, but I was, long story short, sitting in my fraternity house, watching TV one night, and a commercial came on. I went for the state of Maryland. This was right around, even though you call me a madman, not quite of that era, but we'll get to that in a second, right when the seatbelt laws were starting to change. And it was a picture of a calendar with hundreds and hundreds of dots. And it faded out and faded back in, and the calendar was back up with only a couple of dots. And the voiceover said, the original voiceover said, "This is how many people were killed on Maryland highways last year." And when it came back in, faded back in with just a couple of dots, it said, "This is how many were wearing seatbelts." And I thought, heck.
Whoa.
Yeah, it had an impact on me. And while there were other things that I was interested in doing, like writing and being a journalist, and back in the day when the Post and the Times were a big deal, I thought, I want to do that. So I actually went up and changed my major slightly to get a minor in marketing, and skipped a trip to Europe with my best friend the summer after my senior year, to take a job that I was offered at an agency in Rockville, Maryland. Worked in that industry in the city of Baltimore, which has a big industry. Long story short, 1993, moved to New York for a girl, married somebody else, she's here, and have had a 25-year run in the agency/marketing space that has led me small agencies. I was in the interactive space very, very early. Big agencies, I was at WPP and Y&R for a long time. 6 years in the private equity space, and now as a consultant. So I've had a great run. It's not over yet. I've still got another kid to put through college. But it's been great and really interesting.
So I want to do a little time machine with you.
Okay.
How you're sitting there, and you had quite a moment where you had your aha moment, where you're like, oh.
True story, yep.
I want to make one of those. How did you find the courage to do, in Silicon Valley we would call it a pivot. You did quite a big pivot. And let's not forget, at this time, advertising and editorial, or journalism, that was church and state separation. They weren't as close together as they are now. So it's not like being at BuzzFeed Media and walking from one desk to the other. It was like editorial is on the top floor and the ad guys are locked away down the bottom somewhere, and they want to put as many floors as possible between all of them. Tell us a little bit how you managed to make such a jump. Like, where was it blind courage? How did we make jumps like that?
Well, the courage came in telling my parents that I wasn't going to be a lawyer. Right. And their reaction was, we don't know anybody who does advertising, right? Which was a real thing for them. So for me, I liked to write. There was something about, I was a disc jockey in college and I love music, I still do. There was something about the creative side of being a professional that I was attracted to, but had no talent for. So I knew I wasn't going to be a creative, but I was attracted to being in an industry where you could engage with these artists and these people who created ideas. So that led me, in the sort of the classic path of I was an account guy. When I moved to New York, I was an account guy. I got into the digital space very early and got to experience that whole iteration, did a lot of new business and other things. But the attraction of the business for me has always been those moments when you get to engage with the copywriters and the art directors and the other technologists in the last 15, 20 years who create things and come up with these ideas. And being in that environment has been brilliant. And to have any impact on how things get created was just my small part of it. Go ahead.
I'm curious about what some of the big risks that you took after you made that transition. Maybe because you weren't the creative, you were pushing the creatives to do something in a new way to kind of further your goals. working with your clients?
I think for me, when that started, so I had a very classic sort of upbringing. My first real job in the city was in the Chrysler Building at an agency called Bates, which ultimately became part of WPP in the early days. But I got a call one day from a recruiter who said, I met these two guys. They started an agency called Think New Ideas. It's an interactive agency. This is 1996, when the Alley here in New York was just starting to grow. And a lot of you folks won't know these agencies, but Digitas and Razorfish, Think New Ideas, Agency.com.
Red Medium, US.
Yeah, this was the very early days. There was no Alley. There was no startup environment. So to be in that space, 96 to 2001.
That was right at the beginning of the World War.
Right in the beginning, and Adam Curry, who's one of the founders of Think New Ideas, was, if you look him up on Google, this good-looking blonde guy, was in the second generation of VJs on MTV. So after Martha Quinn and Mark Goodman, he was in that next group. But at home at night, he was writing code. And he started this agency. I got to experience he and his partner, Ron, taking it public. And we were primarily just building websites. And the fascinating part to that was, as we started to get into media and online advertising literally started, I mean, we're talking 20 years ago only. That was the most interesting moment for me, where you got in a room with both creatives and technologists and talked about what if and what was possible. Video wasn't really even online yet. I mean, it was just a remarkably interesting period of time, because everything next was new, and we were discovering as we went. So I felt really fortunate to have experienced that, to have been through a public offering, to be part of an organization that was doing digital first.
So I wanted to do a little follow-up question. What is the skill when you've got creative people and technology people all coming together, and it sounds like you love being in the room in these moments of creation? What is the you've developed that's helped you go across so many different types of businesses on different sides, from digital to above line, from big to small? Now, you mentioned private equity. Now you're talking about this very sophisticated advisory. What's the all of those together? What's the Mitch Caplan thing? What do you love to do in that, and what is it? What does that look like?
I think what it feels like is, when I was younger, I was very impulsive. I did not have a lot of patience. And I was vocal about it, and it got me in a lot of trouble. And what I've learned over the years is, when it comes to the creative process, and the creativity has many paths, as you know, business strategy of a private equity firm looking at an acquisition, an advertising agency creating a campaign, is to let it play out. These are, on the agency side, and in many other paths, folks that are artists and brilliant at what they do, and it's very infrequent where the solution comes up like that. And I think where a lot of people make the mistake, and I certainly did, was, especially in the creative process in the agency world, a lot of stuff gets thrown up on the wall. And the iteration process is a very complicated one, and folks are putting their blood and sweat into it. And the ability that I really only learned in the last 10 years to let it just happen, to be demonstrative around what I think is some ideas. You know, you and I were talking before we started about, you realize that I coached soccer for a long time because my boys are into it. And I've got a buddy who was the director of coaching for our soccer team in town, and the greatest lesson I ever learned was from him. On the field one time, some kid gets on the ball, and I start yelling like an old football coach, "Go, go, go," screaming at him.
You were being that parent, right?
And said, tell him to relax. Pose it as a question. When he comes off the field, ask him what he could have done differently, as opposed to saying, "Why didn't you?" So the ability to take a step back, be very thoughtful about being aware of the process other people are going through, and be able to frame guidance not necessarily as definitive, but as open-ended so that folks can solve it for themselves, and to have the patience to let it play out, for me was the biggest change in hopefully allowing me to be a better collaborator and consultant.
What I'm hearing you say is kind of the opposite of the move fast and break things that Mike and I have kind of heard when we're pulling nuggets of wisdom from Silicon Valley. Talking about the likes of Richard Branson or Mark Zuckerberg. But I think this giving creativity space is a really interesting idea that you've both seen on the creative side in the agency, but also you were talking about like in private equity. Maybe not jumping in too soon into a deal, or where something maybe didn't pan out, and it was a good thing that you didn't jump on the opportunity. I'm curious how else that patience has benefited you and the companies over the years.
There's patience, and then there is also when you get the privilege of being in the position of being the decision maker, of being able to make those types of thoughtful decisions. So in the private equity space, I got hired a few years ago to help run and set up an agency in Minneapolis for sale. An old friend of mine from WPP had been brought in as the CEO. He brought me in as the CMO. We thought it'd be 3 to 5 years. We were both commuting back and forth from New York. And 18 months later, we had an acquirer who was highly interested. And they wanted to move fast. And the thoughtfulness on that part was, while we had a shortened period of time to make a decision, we were very thoughtful about getting input from everyone, looking at all the data that was available to us. But at the end of the day, it was the private equity firm's decision and other shareholders. But I had to set it up in a way that they could make a decision quickly. But it was still based on getting input from all different parties and quickly putting it in a structure that could be decided upon.
So
it was a great experience.
This patience and this thoughtfulness, I want to imagine that you're now like us. What's one practice that you have to make that happen? And while you're thinking about it, I'll give you an example. There was a famous Roman emperor who was advised by a very wise man that said, before you make any decision, do the alphabet A to Z, because he was rather impatient. And that's just to take a step back and be more thoughtful. In your case, if you are giving us advice on how we can put this practice into place, what's a tip or a suggestion that you can give to us to bring about some of that?
The simplest thing for me has been realizing unless there is really a sense of urgency, everything can wait. So I used to feel like I had to answer an email right away, right?
Yep.
I don't like what that person's saying, or they need an answer from me right away. And almost 95% of the time, it can wait. So I will give it a couple of hours or even a day so that I can take a minute to take a breath and really think about it. I did not do that when I was younger. Absolutely not. I was bad. So I have learned through actually being a husband and a father and a soccer coach and all those different things and making tons of mistakes, that it's okay to take those moments. The world will wait, business will wait, and you will almost all the time provide a much more thoughtful response, both in how you react and the actual content of what you put out there.
That's great. So thank you for that. Before, and quick warning for our massive, how many did we say? 1,000 people audience? Yeah. Before we go to the throngs who are going to get to ask their questions to Mitch, I know that you actually have returned to your lecture circuit and you actually have the chance to talk to young college students and give them advice. Apart from this reflection that you've put into your practice and this patience, for anyone here in the studio or at home, what other fundamental learnings have you had on your journey that you feel like have really guided you? What practices? Tell us a little bit when you're with those, when you're that guest lecturer, and you've got all these young hopefuls with you. You know, obviously this reflection is one thing, but what else do you try and impart on them to guide them through their career path?
So, for me, I've had a great career, but there is a big part of me that thinks when I was 21, 22, and just starting to get out of school, what would have happened if I had gone to San Francisco, where I had an opportunity and been a concert promoter, right? My aunt was buddies with Bill Graham, and I was like, oh my God, I had a job offer at an ad agency. I have to take this. I didn't go to Europe. So when I'm at the University of Maryland and I'm a visiting lecturer, or I'm talking to a kid who's thinking about going to Maryland, I do some of that kind of work through their alumni association, or anybody else who's just coming out of school or in those first 5 years, I tell them, make sure whatever you do is the one thing you really, really, really want to do. If you want to be a journalist and go work for a newspaper, if you want to be copywriter in an advertising agency, you're 22 or 23. If in 2 years you hate it, you'll be 25. And you can make a pivot, you can make a change. Yeah. So for younger, coming out of school, or juniors or seniors, my biggest piece of advice has been, if there's something you really love, go after that first. And if it don't work out, you're going to work the rest of your life for the most part. You can change, right? And I think that has been, for me, while I don't regret most anything, I wish I'd taken a couple years to venture out and play around a little bit and follow a little bit of a passion, although this was another path for me and it turned out just great. I got to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
So how much better
You
could it
gave
get?
me much good advice, by the way. Very thoughtful advice. Do you remember those calls? I used to call you in New York and like, Mitch, help.
I can't really talk about that because we have
Okay, Chad.
Yeah, so for those of you that have a question or an insight, I'm on maybe what this theme is. I'm
looking over here. That gentleman there with the beer in his hand.
all right. Or just
Thank you, Chad. Mitch, do you have a failure in your career that you always come back to, that you feel like you learned the most from, and kind of helped you grow the most? Is there one that always stands out for you, though? Thank you.
I have to think about it. I wouldn't call them failures. I would call them like I've been fired from jobs, right? And in those moments, it's happened a couple times for me. Sometimes it was my fault, sometimes it was just circumstances. And in those moments, I could have gone in a bad place. And I think aside from marrying up and having someone I can really count on in those moments, I never really lost faith in my ability to make a living at doing something that I really liked, and that things would always work out. If I stayed true to myself and took those moments as just another speed bump in the road, then it always just works out for me. So failure isn't the right word, but a challenging moment, and it always works out for me in a place where I wind up almost in a better place. So I wouldn't recommend getting whacked every once in a while, but if it happens to you, this stuff happens to people, and if you're talented and you're passionate and you're thoughtful, you'll recover and you'll be in a better place.
All right,
great.
let's go for one more.
Yeah, one more.
I'm looking for...
Who else? Ah, here we go.
You spoke a lot about the early part of your career, coming out of college, the different decisions you made along the way. As an accomplished professional, how do you look at a more mature part of your career, and how are you approaching this?
It's a really interesting question. Mature part of my career. For me, I'm very lucky in that I have fallen into a job at Flock, which is a consultancy that works with clients around marketing transformation. And what that means is we go into client organizations. Some of our clients have been Ford and Campbell's and J&J and McDonald's. And I'm able to take the learning I've derived from 25 years in the agency business, and apply it to some of the principles of organizational design, capability assessment, procurement around their agency relationships. So the maturity for me has come from being able to very thoughtfully go back on my experiences, both good and bad, and apply those to helping clients take a look at how they are structured, how they work, and the outcomes they want from their outside partnerships in a manner that's not just all about what are they all doing wrong, but what we can do better. And it's been really interesting. And the ultimate maturity pivot for me is that I'm going to go off and teach. But a lot of the work that I do are workshops where I'm up in front of a group like this and taking folks through a workshop and guiding them to try to figure out what is the right solution as opposed to telling them, which I likely would have done earlier in my career. So,
Well, there you have our first guest, our first of three.
Yeah, stick around.
Inspiring. Number two, would you please show your appreciation for Mr. Mitch? Wardrobe change. What I think we all discovered in that conversation is that to which most of our work happens, which is at high speed. We're bombarded with messages, the expectation to return that email almost instantly. So we live in this moment where we're expected to work at almost an inhuman speed. But what we just learned from Mitch was take a breath. You know, take a pause and just introduce that thoughtfulness. And I really like what seems like a burning fire right now is often not really the DEFCON 1, the sirens are going, the horns are blowing. It's not actually like that. And we often create that chaos, not only for ourselves, but the people around us. And we can just relax and take a breath. So thank you ever so much for that, Mitch Caplan. Now, we come to a very exciting, different journey. I think it's time to invite our audience to show their appreciation from our transcontinental guest. Okay, so, Katrin, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Very excited.
Hopefully you have some
Fans out
some
there.
fellow countrymen back home
Oh, that'd be amazing.
tuning
right?
in.
Yes.
Well, I thought it would be rather
That's what
late.
I'm thinking. It's Gute Nacht
Yeah.
in German at this time, right?
Very much so. So thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
Okay. About Katrin, and there's a couple of things that we really want to get into. Number one, this lady was instrumental in creating an innovation hub, which was a pivotal moment in your career.
Mm-hmm.
And but she has been bold and courageous her bags and to get on probably a Lufthansa flight.
At this time, yes.
Yes, it was into New York.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who has been an expat several times, I can only begin to tell you that this is an amazing amount of work. It's challenging, and this is a great learning, so I'm really excited.
I can only second all of it.
Okay, good. Are we invited? Okay. There's lots to talk about here. but maybe we should start there. You're in your home city, you're in your home country, and you have chosen to invite all this change into your life.
Yeah.
And you've come all the way to New York to lead a business, Tlgg.
Absolutely. Tlgg Consulting, yes.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about what you do here.
Yeah.
But I want you to take us back to this moment where you're like, you know what? I'm going to New York. Tell us about it.
It's actually a funny moment. I was drinking a cocktail at a bar in Frankfurt, and my current boss was sitting next to me, and he was like, so we've just been bought by Omnicom, and I'm planning to open an office in New York. Don't you want to go and run it? And I'm like, whoa, that's a message.
You weren't expecting this.
No, I wasn't expecting it. But I had actually lived in New York for an internship before, back in 2003, which is quite some time ago. I lived in Brooklyn at Hoyt Schermerhorn. You as a Brooklynite will know that, and how it changed since then in the last 15 years. And I was very excited by the thought, and I'd been like, yeah, let me think about it. And then probably a day or two later, I was like, yeah, I'm in, let's do it.
Okay. You went a little too quickly for me there. Exciting, but how do you actually, when it becomes real, how do you actually say yes in a meaningful way? How do you make that leap? Tell us, how do you make those leaps?
I just said yes, but that yes, then it took another 15 months until it actually happened. So just saying yes isn't all it takes, to be honest. It was a gut feeling, and it was a bit of a roller coaster ride until it actually happened. From getting all of your papers in place to make it happen, telling your family that you're actually leaving, telling your boyfriend that you've decided to take that leap, and whether he's open for a long-distance relationship across the and going in all of these beautiful conversations and saying, why are you embarking on a journey that takes you so far away from all of your loved ones? And what is a good argument to do that? And why doesn't it sound super egoistic, hedonistic, and all of these negative terms?
May I just quickly ask,
please
what
go
was
for it.
that argument? Can you
Yeah, I'm curious what the opportunity you saw here that wasn't available to you, and I'm guessing part of it was you're now running this new part of the business, whereas before you weren't. But what brought you? What was the opportunity?
I think it was a moment in my career where for the last probably 5 years, being in corporate innovation, having worked from a flight attendant to an executive assistant of the executive board at Lufthansa, it was really that moment where I realized, well, I've been talking about changing and the need for change and for transformation of organizations in the last 5 years. Maybe to be more credible in what I'm talking about, I actually have to take that leap of faith and get an understanding what it actually means when you change something, and how much discomfort and how much anxiety and how much excitement and how much curiosity that instills, and walk through all of these different moments of change, the change curve that you're going through as an individual. And I think probably I was well equipped. I've always been very curious. I'm a big traveler. I love to go to places. I like to learn about people, their perspectives in lives, new cultures. So I guess all of that kind of transpired in that moment where the opportunity was at the table, and I grabbed it and I said, this is what I got to do. This is the right decision.
Such a remarkable journey, and you've reminded me we need to come back and find out how, the journey you went on from working on the planes to working with the board to coming to, that's something I want to come to. But romanticize this idea of being an expat. And all of a sudden, when you land in the country, it gets real.
Oh, yeah.
And frankly speaking, those first 3, 6, sometimes 12 months are probably, on average, a little bit tougher than in the inspiring, joyful thing you had imagined. Let's go a little dark.
Yeah.
The greatest challenges you faced in that first year, and talk to us a little bit about what happened, what really, and how did you get through it?
Oh, there's a combination of things. So probably the first week I arrived, we really literally carried the furniture into the office, and then the second week we learned there were bed bugs on our floor. in New York. That first month, I was like, oh great, this is a wonderful start. And there was a bit of a personal challenge because my grandmother actually was very sick, and she eventually died in the second month that I was here. So there was a lot of like personal struggle in terms of, whoa, now I'm very far away from my family. How do you support moments like that are kind of extreme? We were very close. But then on the other hand, you realize the world is a small place, because it literally happened on the day that my mom called me and said, well, she's not so well. I booked a flight, I had no clothes, I went to the airport, I flew back, and I went, stayed with her for 4 more days, and then I had to come back to New York, and she died the day later. So, for you, for whatever that means, and so whenever you take bold decisions, there will be something that is given back to you. I think that was probably the lowest moment in the first 3 months.
And for everyone here in the studio and online, I want you to imagine there's an impending crisis, which we all seem to have in life. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for us? Because you're obviously you're engineered to be an optimistic, curious adventurer. Not all of us have such skills. What advice do you have for us to soldier on through those tougher moments?
To me, and I think that's a basic characteristic, I guess, of who I am and how I've been approaching my life. I kind of have this look at the bright side, smile at yourself in the morning, because you are your best friend. And as long as you're taking yourself on the journey with you in a very conscious way, you always have someone by your side. And I feel like that is probably the most positive thing that's been, carrying me through living in 6 different countries, and always finding new social circles, having great people around me, learning about new cultures and new environments, new organizations, new opportunities.
So a big theme that's coming back is this curiosity and this learning that you've spoken about. And one of the amazing things is, how many shows have we done? 50 or so?
47.
47, see?
Wow.
You can see who's the one who's... Now, so check this out. One of the themes we see in great is the practice of learning, continuous learning. What's nice is often people say that the best form of learning is teaching. So I think Mitch has got great learning experiences ahead of him. So I would love to ask you a little bit about how do you learn, and maybe this time tell us about in your work. Because you're in a very creative and a very strategic environment. So there's big ideas flying around. Tell us a little bit about how you learn and how you keep growing.
Yeah.
And what you've learned from the clients that you've worked with, because you've worked with a lot of enormous, very successful companies, and then maybe some smaller startups as well. So I'm curious what you've learned from them.
A lot of things. Few things that might stand out in terms of how do I put that best? It always feels like we're living in a world where there's some of us who are very expressive in the things that they've learned and what they have to talk about, and then there's a whole other community that listens to these people and their ideas and how that's being expressed. And probably one of the greatest learnings that I had throughout my career, working with startups, working in a corporate, working now with amazing companies who are all in the innovation space, looking at curing diseases, transforming industries, transforming themselves, is that it's all about looking at the outside and then also sometimes looking at the inside. And what do you bring to the table, what creates value, and what is out there that you can connect it with to spark or create that next leap of faith or that moonshot or that new practice. And it's really about cross-pollination. So the more you go out in the world, the more you look from, take that from that industry to deploy it in this industry. I think that is probably one of the greatest insights in the last couple of years.
This is very interesting because this outside-inside perspective, I see it reflected in how you think about your practice and work, but it's very reflective also of how you've made those choices to pack your bags from Germany and get on Lufthansa flight land in New York.
Lufthansa will love the marketing.
They will. And we will get to your work with Lufthansa, by the way. I mean, masterpiece here, a little bit. So I'm sorry about that. We'll get to it. But this inside out, if you were to imagine you're teaching us now, how can we look outside and look inside to inspire us? Because that's obviously a really nice contrast. What can we do? How can we do that? Teach us, like, what could we do in our work to incorporate that practice, looking outside, looking in?
I'm not a teacher like Mitch is. I'm more, I don't know, I can only tell you how I'm doing it, and then maybe you can take something away for yourself. I don't know, it's just an idea. I'm a big fan of self-care, and I think as much as we bring out there and express ourselves in the world, as much as we interact with one another, as much it's important to interact with yourself. And look at all of the different components of mind, body, and soul that you want to take care of, and do that quite actively. I know it's a bit of a trend these days, which is unfortunate, I think, sometimes.
You think it's a little too trendy?
Yeah, it's a bit of a too trendy kind of subject where, you know, I'm not in that marketing aspect of it, although obviously working in that industry.
So how can I,
Yeah.
what's a tool you use for reflection? You talked a little bit about looking on the inside and self-care. What does that look like? What could I do?
It's a quiet moment, ideally. It's, you know, sitting with a tea on the couch or in the park or at the waterfront, and then taking that moment to step back from everything, and pretty much similar to what Mitch said, take yourself out of the situation, step back and reflect on things. That is something you can do. But also it can be the absolute opposite for me. Sometimes I just love to go somewhere else and, you know, challenge the mind with a new culture, with a new experience, with something that I haven't, you know, experienced yet. Go to a music club you've never been to, the music you don't like, for example, and expose yourself to the situation. Talk to someone who has a politically opposite opinion of yours and try to understand why they have that opinion.
I think you could probably do that in America.
Oh, quite easy. But then I have lived in Oklahoma, so, you know, I have the full broad spectrum of what's possible here politically.
Okay, so that's really inspiring. So you're saying search out the different things. Yeah. One of the things you're saying is go with a curious mind. Just be open and just discover. You know, don't pass judgment.
I strongly agree. I mean, I don't know, it was maybe 2004, I traveled, it was before the Olympics in China. I flew to Beijing, didn't speak obviously a word of Chinese all by myself, took a cab to the Chinese, to the wall, water, it was 100 degrees, almost died, you know, some Chinese gentleman gave me a bottle of water. I walked through Mexico City all by myself, despite the fact that everyone said don't do that. I think yes, it's sometimes taking a risk and, you know, taking that leap of faith that the positivity that you bring to a place might reflect in that place.
Okay.
My mom, though, she doesn't know these stories.
Well, you got Mexico City. I remember the first time I went to Mexico City, it felt like I had a personal armory just to get me to the office for the meeting, which was a bit unusual. Yeah,
you don't have that as a flight attendant at Lufthansa, so you have to either go outside all by yourself or you stay in the hotel. I would always go outside.
Okay, so I feel we have to get some advice from you here, because you started your career and made one of the most wonderful journeys. Obviously, I for you to share with our audience this remarkable story you went on working at Lufthansa, because it's really very inspiring.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting, I don't know if it's an interesting story, it's just what happened to me, I suppose. So I started in a very interesting program that some of the German corporates offer, which is a vocational training, which is something that is not so common in the US, I think, in combination with a study program. So I did a classical bachelor's degree in business, and I became an expert on air traffic management. So I know what it takes to calculate the right weight balance for an aircraft to take off and to land, for example. Some very basic mathematical knowledge that I never used again in my career. With my studies, I was like, great, what I'm going to do now, I'm 22 years old, I really don't want to work in an office, and seriously, I'm not going to eat in canteens every day. So I decided, well, you're at Lufthansa, become flight attendant. So I did that for 3 years, started to study psychology because I was curious of the mind and the human, realized, maybe that's not a career choice. But I was able to probably travel to 60 countries in the time. From Iran to Ethiopia to, China, everywhere, whatever. So that and intriguing. I enjoyed that a lot, but at some point, probably at the top of the hill, I was like, this will get boring eventually, and I had done a master's degree in Spain, was done with it in innovative hospitality management.
Just hang on a second. Have you guys got a visual global map? Crisscross. I'm trying to... How are your frequent flyers, by the way? Are they off the charts?
These days, yes, but now I fly Delta, so it's the US, right? Back then, I was employed by the company, so you have the wonderful benefit of being able to fly for quite some discounted fares.
So let's on your journey here, because you ended up being instrumental in the airline's innovation hub. So we'll just skip over the fact that you were taking care of the whole board. We'll just skip over that. We'll just get to the innovation hub.
That's also not so important.
Okay. How did you get there, and if you were to be speaking to young people watching at home or our fabulous studio audience, how might we invite such possibilities into our lives?
I'm also curious, like many of us are working at companies where we millennials, want to buck the trends and be innovative and do our own things. And it sounds like you were very instrumental in kind of making that happen inside of a company like Lufthansa. So I'm very curious, kind of the message you have for us young folks that are trying to bust through the ceilings.
I think it's going to be a bit disappointing because it was a lot of some perseverance, probably. It was me sitting, or it all happened, we were a lot of young kids seeing that digital transformation was a subject that was a lot talked about in the media and all of the information that were given to the board from consultancies to whoever. But really in the day-to-day, nobody spoke about it in the company, and we were like, there's a mismatch. And so we brought it to a discussion piece, but everyone was like, not that important. I was sitting with the CFO at the time in a meeting, and she asked for some cultural change management, a subject that Mitch also talked about. Why don't we use Facebook for that? And that question actually led to her then being more curious about the subject of digital transformation, how that comes about, why maybe as a corporate you do not want to use Facebook for your internal communications. So she embarked, and we said, well, we have some ideas, but we would need some money. And then she actually gave us a budget to explore that journey. And in the end, we founded a company 6 months later with 4 of us to build the Lufthansa Innovation Hub out of Berlin as its first location. And I think last week they opened a second location in Singapore.
Wow. I want to ask one more question before Chad embarks on crowd surfing 2.0.
Yeah.
I want to pick up a little bit on what Chad was saying, and I want you to, you've obviously had this you've had this curious mind, and you've been so open to going out into the world and finding new things and exploring. If people who are listening to our conversation right now are wondering like, oh geez, I would love to do that, but where does it start? What's the practice that I can go and do today that might, because it sounds, but sort of, do you have a practical thing that we can start doing to invite these sort of possibilities into our lives?
Start with yourself, I guess. You are the master of your own life. You can decide what you want to do. You can pick it up. You can think about it in a positive way. You can think about it in a negative way. And that sounds, obviously, I have been very fortunate. I'm not saying that I'm, coming out of a challenging environment. So that definitely is something that, is part of the basis where I'm coming from. And for some people that might sound very, unreachable. there's so many people that have come from way more challenging environments and have reached such great career steps, such great output in their life, that I think it lies within you and you can make it happen if you want to.
Okay, well said. Okay, so this time remember, for our audience, it's your chance to decode what's happening. You're giving it back to me.
Well, so that the audience can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hello, audience. Who's got a question for Katrin? Who wants to invite these sort of adventures into their lives? And I have this extrasensory ability to find a question, and I feel drawn into this space of the audience. So Chad, take the microphone, and I can feel that, there's some question, potentially someone wearing, there we go, I could tell you, I could feel it.
Is there anything you would have done differently in your life? Because you've obviously done some amazing things. Is there anything any regrets that you've had?
Oh, there's probably a few, yeah. I think it's good to have them, because the biggest learnings you probably take out of these moments of, that didn't go the way I kind of had it in mind or planned or anticipated or thought about it. Yeah, for sure. But I still feel I'm tremendously lucky in everything that happened to me. I would not, I would always say that, wow, I had a very, very amazing life in any kind of sense. Very fortunate.
Okay, who else?
So you've already done so many things, but what's next? Like, what's a new frontier for you?
I think probably it's going to be a little bit more in my private life focus than it is in a career focus. I think, when you reach whatever level you reach and you have a feeling, I did never expect that this would happen, and probably that was a moment sometime late last year where I thought like, wow, I did not expect that this would all happen in my life, and I'm, in my 30s, so it feels like, okay, maybe I'm looking at shifting focus a little bit and looking at other things that might be important.
And I'm sure you did some quiet moments on the couch, I think, or in the park, you said, to come to this realization?
Almost. It was Miami Beach, but yeah.
Oh, Miami Beach. Brooklyn, so certainly. I don't think many quiet.
Oh, it depends on where you go.
So, what in courage and curiosity? Would you all please give it up for courage? Do the famous wardrobe challenge. So I want you to this, and parallels. I think what's really interesting, if you notice the conversations that are happening, if you notice, there's this interesting thing of learning, of courage and curiosity. So when I already reflect on our first two guests, I'm immediately ready to go to the internal and the external, the curiosity, that sense of adventure. But what's very interesting for me is that there was this thought of taking a moment of self-care. Mitch quite us, not everything is a burning bushfire emergency. It will be okay. So I want you all to kind of take this on board and think about it, because I think it sets us up so much to orientate ourselves on how we can go out in the world, do the things we love, which was also, by the way, a great piece of advice from Mitch, to go out and just do it. So this fills me with curiosity and wonder for what our third guest is going to share with us tonight. To admit one thing as we welcome Scott to the stage. San Francisco, and I reached out to Scott and said, Scott, would love. And he says, oh, no, you don't want me. No, you don't want me on the show. And I was like, Scott, you have the most amazing story. and there is so much to learn. So I want you guys to like double down and really enjoy what we're about to get into, because to introduce the president of the Nantucket Project, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But he has also got a fabulous career that has spans, let's see if my memory is serving me well and the jet lag's not getting hold of me. We've got HBO, we've got ESPN, we've got the hotels, and now under the moniker of the Nantucket Project. It is such an exciting spectrum of experiences that we can all learn from. So I wanted to ask with the Nantucket Project. It seems like such a fabulous festival. But tell us a little bit about it and what it means to be kind of curating such a special event.
Okay. It's founded 9 years ago up on Nantucket by a guy and two co-founders who had worked together at Nantucket Nectars. Tom Scott had founded the company. On the heels of winding down Plum TV, which was a media company, and I came in as chief restructuring officer and interim CEO during that sale of the company. So I had met him there. It was really designed as a 4-day TED-like, Aspen Institute-like thing for exactly what you just talked about with Katrina, which is, lifelong learners, these seekers of exploration and such. And it's now we're going into our 9th year. It's now divided into live events. So we do 4 days up on Nantucket for 500 people under a tent at the White Elephant. And then we take that show on the road. We go across the country. We do one-night events. We're doing a spectacular tour of the country this summer. We've been just back from Sundance. And then, so there's a live events division. And then we invite this past year, it's, on one spectrum, it's Tony Blair and President Bush, and Neil Young and Paul Giamatti. It's a crazy collection of art and science and technology and politics and the like. And then out of, let's say, it's Mike Parsons talking about Moonshots. What happens is you inspire us. We have 5 filmmakers in the crowd, all staffed up by us or a stable of filmmakers that we work with. They're inspired by something you talked about in the Moonshot. We may use a little bit of your talk. We're not TED Talks. But we then go out and are inspired to find the thing about Moonshots that completely transforms the idea. And it's a feature film, but it's not feature length. It's all short form content.
So it's almost like the event sort of starts like a chain reaction.
Yeah, the talks become, films become something else. And so there's this, what we call the TNP Lab, and they're a group of content makers. And then we have an academy, which we take 15 scholars a year and run them through a curriculum. They're selected for, basically the criteria is how are you impacting the world. They're either about to go to market or they're already in the market with an idea, a product, a service that is got some sort of an impact. And we help accelerate them through learning storytelling, business planning, human engagement, business planning if they need it, and then our network. We usually see 2 or 3 pop through a year. And then we just launched this thing, and then I'll shut up.
No, just did you see the list, the job description list doing this? I'm overwhelmed.
Clear, we have a great
great group of people, and this is not my baby, this is Tom's baby, and I'm along for the ride. But we did what essentially was it wasn't even a proof of concept. This is along the lines of the Moonshot. A friend of ours said, she was so inspired by the 4 days, she said, will you come over to my house, and I want to help promote your thing. People don't really get it. And so we went to her house, we brought what was probably a 45-minute reel of our content. And by the way, our content is about humility, acceptance, grace, reclaiming democracy, all packaged into these, it's now called snackable, digestible, whatever you want in the digital world, content. And we strung probably 45 minutes together, and people's reaction, and they were just invited for popcorn, and their reaction was, I haven't had a conversation like this in years. I talk about small things, but I don't talk about big things. And we did it again, same woman's house, and then Tom said, let's start a conversation series. And so what started as something called Conversations think of a book group with our content. So you gather a group like this, you press play, nobody has to read anything, there's no homework. You press play and you watch a series of, it's probably 22 to 30 minutes, and then you have a conversation. And we're now in 22 states. We have, I think, 12 modules, so we're 12 months into this thing. And the beauty is, Mike starts a group, Chad starts a group. What street do you live on?
Rosemount Avenue.
Okay, so it's called the Rosemount Avenue Project. Mm-hmm. You submit that on kind of a creative brief to us. We do all the artwork. And then we push it back to you. Then that becomes a paperless post invite. You're responsible for getting your 12 people in your living room. Anybody can manage it. Anyway, so we want to have, eventually, if we get scale, as we're getting, we'll have a national conversation. Our goal is March 1st, the Neighborhood Project conversation on moonshots. And we'll have 100,000 people talking about moonshots. That would be on Tuesday morning, whatever it is. Yeah. So
it sounds like at the heart of what the Nantucket Project is doing is convening interesting, diverse sets of people to have these conversations that maybe aren't being had with that group of diverse people. We're kind of stuck in our echo chambers, talking to people that are like-minded with one another. And what's interesting to me is much of what Mike and I have found in our discovery in the Moonshot podcast is it is about getting the right people together to do the thing that they want to do. But what you're doing is you're not only doing that with your own team in the Nantucket Project, but you're actually scaling that out in the world, putting those projects together all over the place. So I'm inspired, and I'm going to create the Myrtle Avenue project as soon as we leave. But I'm curious what you have learned about your experience. Like, what does it take to get the right people together? How do you inspire them, and how do you give them that, I guess, push to then have those maybe difficult or unlikely conversations?
Well, all the science, all the statistics are in our favor. The science is that if you create more meaning in your life, you'll live longer, you'll be happier, you'll be less depressed, you'll sleep better. And so it is a method of creating greater meaning in one's life. Whether it's with 5 people or 12 people, or in a tent with 500 people, and then having the real conversation. So we ask that there's no small talk. It's not, where's your kid going to school, which is what a lot of us get caught up in, and what are the scores, and how are they doing, and what trip did you take, and what was the service like, which is all great. But there is this massive disconnect that's occurring with social channels, and depression is spiking with young people, and so this is an anecdote.
And what a broad spectrum of activities that makes this an antidote. I want to segue us a little into how, I mean, as you were explaining, as you were giving us the spectrum of all of the programs that you're running, in a very practical manner, explain to us, how do you manage across so many different areas? And of course, there's teams working, but how do you personally deal with tracking? Is this on track? Is this on track? Because you spoke about so many different, you've got the cohort of the 15, you've got the new projects initiating, you have an event, I mean, you're making how do you personally, I mean, you've obviously got a notebook, so that seems like a good start, but how do you manage personally across that?
Great question. We invested in Scrum, which is...
Very good.
You know, when we first met, you had Sunrise. Do you remember that? Do you remember that app? I don't know what happened to it, but that
Microsoft bought them.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Mike taught me about Sunrise, which was an organizational tool early on. We use Scrum pretty religiously through our units. So we were inspired by a book called Above the Line, which is Urban Meyer, who coached Florida and then went to Ohio State, and he wrote this book, and he talked about his units. So we've adapted all of our, I mean, we're a tiny little group. We have 29 full-time employees. When I joined, we were 6. But without Scrum, we'd be dead, because there are 10 units in the company. We just OKRs. John Doerr's book, What Matters Most, which is so aligned with what matters most, which is in our mission, because we are in search of what matters most.
So those of us that aren't in the know, like Scrum, OKR,
Tell us more.
Okay, so the Scrum technology, or Scrum, the methodology is just tracking project work. It was developed in the Valley probably with agile software guys. And it's a great tool for engineers, and we were all like, what the hell are we going to do this with such a creative staff? And it's just moving Post-its around and having sprints on a weekly basis, so that if I'm responsible for getting WPP to sponsor the train that we're going to take around the country, have I made those calls? And it's doing the project itself, and then it's doing, and you move it over to done by the end of the week. So it creates transparency. If Mike's not holding up his end of the bargain in my unit, I can see on the Post-it, so do you need help? How can I remove the obstacle? And it's just like marching down until you're done. There's a little bit of tactile feel of finishing the job, because you get to take the Post-it down, throw it away, Yahoo, ring a bell. And then Tom decided to move to OKRs. He got, as we scale, it's becoming untenable. We are doing short-form content for a lot of clients, and then for ourselves, and entering them in film festivals, and premiering them on the road, and premiering them at the Nantucket Project. And so there's a factory-like, from Warhol to the Ames factory system. And then it's a good way to collaborate with people that have different capabilities, I would say.
So, we've talked about Agile, we've talked about Scrums and OKRs, and these are all different methodologies by which you can organize people and get work done. But I wanted to ask you, those functional ways of organizing are one way to look at it. In your role, I want you to tell us, what do you focus on when you're working with those 29 team members across so many different projects? How are you thinking and feeling when you're sitting with a team or you're working with the team? What is the thing you're focused most upon when working with that team and helping them get to that job done on Friday? What's top of mind in how you can help them and how they can move?
I look at the end and work backwards. So say if one of the inspirations around the office is create miracles. And if you're going to create a miracle in customer relations or the event, or have a short film that's talked about how do you get here and then work back and figure out.
Right. So reverse engineering.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this is a really interesting...
And then calm down. I mean, I would take a page from Mitch, which is, I'm old enough now to know that, and I'm a cyclist, and there's a cyclist prayer, which is, there will be chaos, keep pedaling. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because you do want to embrace the moment and understand and coach, but you just have to keep going. Otherwise, the peloton falls apart, and every cyclist is got, yeah.
House of cards. So when you get to those moments, and this just reminds me of when Katrina had said, you know what, Deutschland, auf Wiedersehen, New York, here I come. You take these big leaps, and then you often, after your peak of expectations, go on a very slippery slope into the valley of darkness. When you're facing moments where you're like, I'm questioning whether I should keep pedaling, but you kind of somewhere you have to keep pedaling, but it would be just so nice to stop pedaling. It's a bit like when the alarm goes off and you look at the snooze button and you're like, oh, that would be so nice. How do you, in your case, how do you keep pedaling? How do you keep going? Is there some things that you do that help you just keep on track and just keep going?
Probably, yeah. I wish I had something pithy to say. I think you just have to keep the momentum, and much of it is, whether it's management or leadership, and it's that incentivizing people that idea is the idea, or it's not the best idea you've had. I know that you can do better. We work at such a pace that you get afraid that people are used to just churning it out. And there is time for there is time for better work. And you just have to remind yourself that there is oftentimes a better path, and it's not always full of bumps and bruises, and I'm not sure that's as
falling off the peloton.
Yeah.
I have just one final question, and I would like to ask two other people in the audience kind of what some of the themes you've heard from everyone this evening. But what surprised you most, Scott, about working with this particular team? So you've led other teams. You said you've been interim CEO and you've had other positions in leadership. The people at the Nantucket Project sound like a very interesting group of people. I'm just kind of curious what has surprised you most about working with this particular group, and kind of what you've learned and adapted your leadership in order to help you all achieve what your OKRs.
I would say there's it sounds so hokey, but there is a passion and an unquenchable thirst for making the human connection a better thing, which is why, coming from hospitality and media and the theater before that, creating the greatest experience you can. And that doesn't mean, that means something like this. That means making sure that every touch point is reflective of the brand, reflective of the purpose. And that I don't think we compromise on. And that's a testament to the senior-most leadership at the country, as a company.
So holding on tight to the vision and almost don't settle for any compromise on vision. Maybe it sounds like you can be flexible on how you get there, but really
absolutely. I would say with most brands today, there should be a framework and a filter in which you can make decisions and let people make good decisions. But it's so fluid right now with all brands that you have to punch above your weight. You just have to, in order to cut through it in any, and so you cannot be afraid to go out of bounds and not risk everything, but certainly swing for a fence or two.
I like that. That was also very, very connected to, this search of adventure, and just Mitch was just saying to his younger self, just go for it, right? Just go for it. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. We're going to send Chad. Get ready to take the jump, the lunge, and remember sensory device.
It's deafening.
For where a question might come from. And I feel like there's maybe some beer drinking troublemakers right up the back there, Chad, who are conjuring good questions.
Yeah, or I'm also curious about the themes that you've heard emerging this evening.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a question, but I have been thinking about sort of what you've all been speaking about, and I think there's some element of appreciating one's own agency in controlling your narrative, taking a step back and not letting necessarily, outside forces sort of influence too much, and just sort of re-recognizing, your role in sort of charting that course and figuring out what it is you want to do. And it's interesting because you've all had a pretty broad assortment of experiences and courses, but that seemed to resonate sort of throughout all three was, don't lose sight of your own role in the where you go and how you've ended up there, things like that.
Yeah, I would frame that as your own moral code. If anybody read the paper today about Carlos Known, I think you pronounce his last name, guy from Renault and Nissan, who's been in jail, right? And so the Renault cut him loose today, or yesterday, whenever the news cycle broke. But the quote today, and I wrote it because I thought this was a quote from him, and this comes back to don't forget who you are, and I don't care how big your job is. So he's apparently accused of misappropriating funds that were used for personal gain. When you invite people to a party, they say maybe. When you invite them to Versailles, they will come. So apparently he expensed his second marriage, right, Mitch? His fifth, was it his fifth? No. Yeah, his second marriage. So I want to read that again. I mean, just don't forget who you are. When you invite people to a party, they say maybe. When you invite them to come to Versailles, they'll come. And he thought that.
Wow.
He was on the record saying
So, yeah, that was a quote from today's paper. Like, who does this shit? I mean, really, we're going to, the shareholders of Nissan and Renault are going to pay for his second wedding at Versailles.
it was really at Versailles.
It was really at see these photos.
Oh my gosh.
But it happens time and time again.
Yeah, we see it all the time.
All the time.
Anyone else that had some reflections on maybe something that they're taking away from this wonderful discussion that we've had here on the Moonshots podcast live in New York?
I'm sensing there's a gentleman over there who's dying to contribute. I can see it in him.
I similarly don't know if I have a question, but just appreciating kind of thematically what was said. And that last comment kind of hits home, having worked with a company called MDC Partners and their former showrunner, Miles Nadal. So not quite as bad, but in any event, I digress. I just personally really appreciated kind of the, going back to Mitch, I took it as kind of like an interdisciplinary approach, like learning through teaching really stuck with me. And kind of the coaching aspect and how you paralleled that with business practice. And as a millennial myself, I think the pacing of how you respond and how you prioritize is constantly an issue. So I think, that is a big takeaway, and just trying to keep that in the back of your mind, how you operate and how you channel, your contribution, and again, how you just kind of prioritize all of that really struck me. So much appreciated. Not that I didn't appreciate everyone's comments, but.
Thank you. Okay, guys, it's Friday. Still some beer and pizza left. But I really want to invite all of you just to take that people offered. And remember that as long as you keep learning, I think this is the big theme we've learnt together, isn't it? We've studied all of these entrepreneurs and innovators, and tonight what we've seen is, once again, there is curiosity, learning, intentionality, and if we can just remind ourselves of those things and bring those into our workday, then we can all shoot for the moon. So, guys, I'd love you all to show your appreciation for our 3 guests. Come on, guys. Brooklyn Denim Refinery. And thank you to you, to all our. Thank you. Please go and check out all of the archive of this show and all the other 47. So check on the Moonshots podcast. Thanks, everyone.